I personally am always suspicious of games based on movies, and especially anime. In the 8-bit era, we had the luxury of getting some really great games based on American cartoons, like the Ninja Turtles and DuckTales, thanks to Konami and Capcom. But after moving to Japan, I quickly realized that 9 out of 10 times, games based on anime were just out to use the name recognition of a popular series to make a quick buck, and were rarely worth my time. That being said, with diligence, you can find some beautiful games based on Japanese anime series that don't use their fame to hide behind lackluster gameplay. And today, I'm going to introduce my top 10 anime-based retro games that get the ultra-healthy seal of approval. Patent pending. Coming in at number 10 is UN Squadron for the SNES. Surprised? UN Squadron was actually based on a comic series called Area 88, which is reflected in the Japanese title. It's an excellent port of a side-view arcade shooter and showed off the power of the Super Nintendo early in its lifespan. You earn money as the game progresses to buy better ships with different types of special weapons. There are also 3 different pilots to choose from when the game starts, who all have their own specialties, giving UN Squadron the highest replayability factor of any shooter at the time of its release. Next, number 9 is Hyperia, again for the Super Famicom. The game is based on an anime series called Iria Zeiram, which itself was based on a movie with live actors simply called Zeiram. The story centers on Iria, an alien hunter in a faraway galaxy, and the game keeps to the original story by building the levels around the idea of bounty hunting. There are a surprising number of weapons that can be bought in between levels or sometimes found within them, including stronger guns and bombs with a variety of effects. Hyperia is plagued by really bad slowdown, and it isn't very long, but the aspect of figuring out which weapons suit your playstyle keeps the game interesting. For number 8, it's Cyborg Kuro-chan for the PlayStation. Cyborg Kuro-chan was an anime for kids about a robotic cat and his life with a normal family of humans while trying to escape other evil robots. While there are 2 games based on the series for the Game Boy Color, the PlayStation game is a proper side-view run-and-gun with a rather deep power-up system. You have 6 weapons and find power-up capsules that allow you to power up a weapon, increase its maximum bullets, or other parameters like speed and defense. This was actually one of the first games I ever reviewed on my channel, so if you want to know about it in detail, you can always watch that episode. If you can deal with a budding, slightly more awkward ultra-healthy video game nerd. Next is Genji Tsushin Agedama for the PC Engine, or the Japanese TurboGrafx 16. NEC was actually a sponsor of the anime, which is how it ended up becoming a game on the PC Engine. It's a side-view platformer, but most of the levels scroll automatically, making it a bit different from the standard Mario-style platforming. You can charge up different and stronger attacks as you collect more items, but of course you can't attack while you're charging. The graphics are bright and the music is appropriate for a light-hearted superhero series. But watch out, the last level is way harder than the rest of the game. Coming in at number 6 is Ghost Sweeper Mikami for the Super Famicom. The anime was like a checklist of trends for 90s anime. A tough, hot lady in a miniskirt fighting ghosts and demons, and the game itself is a pretty standard side-view platformer developed by Natsume. You attack with a kendo stick and can also use it to latch onto platforms and pull yourself up. There are also a couple variations to the gameplay, like a level where you shrink down and ride on a runaway cat. Ghost Sweeper Mikami is not a difficult game, but the vibrant graphics, reliable control, and inspired boss characters make it a keeper in my book. Moving into the second half, number 5 is Bucky O'Hare for the NES or Famicom. I know, this is an American cartoon, and we generally think of anime as referring to Japanese cartoons, but Bucky O'Hare is so great I had to include it on this list. This is an extraordinary platformer for the NES, with all kinds of crazy gameplay gimmicks like riding on boulders, roller coasters, and countless others. After playing it, you might say to yourself, this is a lot like the kind of game Treasure would have made. That's because it's basically a prototype Treasure game. The credits reveal that it was produced by M. Maegawa, of course meaning Masato Maegawa, who went on to establish Treasure shortly after. I highly recommend picking this game up, no matter the cost. The next entry is the legendary Gegege no Kitaro. This was a comic series that started in the 60s and ended up becoming an iconic anime about Japanese ghosts. An anime this popular is bound to be turned into a game, and actually, most of them were well received. The SNES game was a bit lackluster, but the Game Boy Advance and PlayStation games are critically acclaimed and now highly sought after. The Game Boy Advance game was a traditional platformer, while the PlayStation version was a side-view action game that focused more on bosses than on platforming. It's also worth mentioning that Gegege no Kitaro was the 5th last game released on the PlayStation 1, coming out at the tail end of 2003. Number 3 is Hameru no Violinbiki, or The Violinist of Hamelin, once again for the Super Famicom. I've never seen the anime, but you can get the basics of the story just by playing the game. It features an unlikely hero in the form of a wandering violin player and the girl who falls for him, and the comedy arises from his crude, thoughtless treatment of her. This dynamic is the basis for the game, a platform puzzler in which you find costumes for your would-be girlfriend to wear. These costumes all have different special abilities, which you then use to cross over hazards and progress through the levels. The costume animations are all appropriately silly and bring to life the love-hate relationship your characters have. I still think The Violinist of Hamelin is one of the best Super Famicom games that never came to the West. Now, for one of my favorite games ever based on a Japanese comic series, it's Kujaku 2, or Mystic Defender, for the Sega Mega Drive. Mystic Defender is an arcade-style side-view action game that isn't actually an arcade port, it just plays like one. The artwork is super dark, with grotesque demons that you would never have seen on a Nintendo console at the time. The comic, whose Japanese name means Peacock King, is about an exorcist who takes on Buddhist demons. It borrows a lot from religious mythology, and in the Japanese version the main character is actually wearing a Shinto priest's robe, whereas in the US version his clothes look a bit more like armor. This is one game that proves atmosphere can be just as important as gameplay. Before I reveal my number 1 choice for this list, I'd like to introduce a game that almost belongs here but not quite, so I'm giving it an honorable mention. It's a Game Boy Advance game called Hachiemon, who is the mascot character for Kansai TV, a TV station in the Osaka area. What kind of animal is he? I'm not sure, but the game he was given is a surprisingly well-made platformer by Namco. The quirk to the gameplay is your mouth, which you can use to grab onto walls and platforms and then stretch or rebound yourself to get to higher areas. Much like games based on anime, a game based on a TV station's mascot could easily turn out to be a hastily made promotional tool, but Hachiemon is tons of fun with lots of hidden secrets and silly story sequences. The difficulty is kind of all over the place, but since it's not the type of game most people would expect much of a challenge from, it doesn't hurt the experience much. And the number 1 game based on an anime series is the illustrious Zillion for the Sega Master System. Zillion was a science fiction anime from the 80s and spawned 2 games on the Master System, although most people would agree the sequel was a disappointment. The first game, however, is a deep adventure game that sits among some of the highest rated games on the console. You have to infiltrate 5 enemy bases and use symbols to decipher codes that gradually allow you to access areas deeper in the bases. The scale of the game was huge for a Master System title, and always kept the player busy. This certainly wasn't a basic run and gun. The opening theme song from the anime, Pure Stone, was also arranged for the Master System's sound hardware and plays in certain parts of the game. It's a real masterpiece of the 80s. There are so many anime-based retro games, and to be honest, a large portion of them are total crap, so it's best to be super vigilant if you're considering buying one, even if you do like the series. Hopefully, this list can point you in the right direction. And while I may have thrown away my Dakimakura long ago, that doesn't mean that I'm too good for anime. Come on, waifu, let's go celebrate!